I've always really liked cards from these 4 specific Pokemon card artists. Kagemaru Himeno, having illustrated some of the most iconic cards over literal decades. Masakazu Fukuda, most famous for their elusive Gold Star cards, especially in Japanese. Atsuko Nishida, for their ability to make any Pokemon look gentle, calm, and cute. And Tomokazu Komiya, for their eccentric, almost warped depiction of Pokemon and the world that they inhabit. But starting artist binders or collections from these illustrators these days is tough. Komiya-san has drawn 269 cards, Nishida-san has drawn 443, Fukuda-san totals 487, and Himeno-san a whopping 652. And with each of these artists drawing for practically decades at this point, naturally there's already a lot of collectors collecting their cards. So starting from scratch as a Japanese collector is tough. But a little while back, I went to Japan purely to visit Pokemon card stores. I've been lucky enough to visit Japan a few times over the years, and being a Japanese speaker, I know my way around. So in just 8 days, I visited over 90 card stores. And while I showed you guys most of those stores, I never really showed you what I bought. My goal on this trip was very simple: to collect as many cards as I could by Kagemaru Himeno, Masakazu Fukuda, Tomokazu Komiya, and Atsuko Nishida. But I couldn't target any of their chase or high-end cards because I wanted to build a strong foundation. I didn't want to spend all my money on 1 or 2 cards and then not really build a binder. But beyond that, I wanted to see just how many vintage cards by these illustrators were still sitting on the shelves in Japan. So over the 8 days, I ended up visiting 7 different cities, 2 of which you guys have seen here before, the long form vids, and then 2 that I didn't actually publish. So we're starting in Osaka, primarily Nipponbashi, because there's a high concentration of card stores here. And this was day 1 of the trip. So the first store that we ended up visiting was C-Labo Level 5 in Nipponbashi. Now, if you've seen the Osaka video, you'll know that this was one of my favorite stores in all of Osaka, primarily because there's just so much vintage on display here. In fact, I think it's all vintage. Most of it is yellow sticker, so each of the cards here has some level of damage to it, but that's part of the fun. You're trying to find a card that you need for your collection that's in relatively good condition at a good price. So when I was conceptualizing this video in Japan, I had set these limitations to make it sort of like a challenge video, because challenge videos in Pokemon are kind of trending at the moment. I went into this one being 1 card from each artist per store. But I felt like if I did that, I wasn't going to really walk away with a whole lot of cards. And the goal of the trip was to build these artist binders, not to make a challenge video. So I quickly left that idea behind. Having said that, I didn't want to go too hard too early, so I was kind of like limiting my purchases really early on. The Blastoise here by Kagemaru Himeno caught my eye very early, just because it's such a soft illustration of Blastoise. It just makes them look a little bit cuter. I'm not big on like cute Pokemon, but I feel like this style or like this depiction of Pokemon has kind of been left behind a little bit. And so I just wanted to pick it up, especially because the holo looks so clean and it was relatively cheap too. And then the other card that caught my eye was this Gardevoir by Atsuko Nishida. Again, just felt very soft. I liked the very strong shadow at the bottom of Gardevoir there. And I felt like it just contrasted very well with the flowers there too. And of course, this generation of holos is just so good. Diamond Pearl Platinum cards are some of my favorites. So as the trip went on, you will see that I gravitate very heavily towards cards of this style. I did leave a bunch of cards on the shelf, primarily this Arceus, because I felt like I was going to see a lot of cards like that as the trip went on. And again, I didn't want to go too hard too early. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about the binders I'm using. So for this collection, I'm going to start with 2 artists per binder. I'm using the 9-pocket Volt X SV binders because the colors on these absolutely slap. Tomokazu Komiya and Masakazu Fukuda in SV6, Kagemaru Himeno and Atsuko Nishida in the SV7. And if you like these, you can save 10% at Volt X with my codes in the description. So after a relatively long visit at C-Labo, moved on to the next store, which was Magi in Nipponbashi. Now, Magi has a bit of a reputation for being pretty overpriced, and when I visited at the time, most of the cards here were pretty expensive, but that didn't mean that there weren't any cool finds inside. They had a lot of Delta species cards, and these are traditionally illustrated by either Masakazu Fukuda, Koki Saito. Again, I didn't want to go too hard too early. I didn't want to spend all my money on the first day of the trip. There was a Touch Generation by Tomokazu Komiya here, which in hindsight I should have picked up because it was so cheap, but I left that behind, meaning no Komiya cards on the board just yet. So after a very long time spent browsing the shelves, which is pretty easy to do inside Magi considering how much vintage there is, I found this Wooper by Atsuko Nishida. The cool thing about this is that it's a McDonald's promo too from 2002, handed out for just a 1-month period. So a card that old at 3,580 yen by a very, very notable artist. It was a little bit of a no-brainer, and the condition was fantastic and a nice little addition there. So I was pretty happy about that. Like I said, I had a budget. I didn't want to spend all my money in the second store of an 8-day trip. So it was time to move on to C-Labo number Niten. This is the second sea labo in Nipponbashi, and again, a very cool store because of how much vintage is in here. Stores like these are perfect if you're trying to build an artist binder or a Pokédex binder because they have such a large volume of vintage cards. Old stuff that, is cheap because it's so common, but also because the cards are damaged and have yellow stickers. Sometimes you find rare cards that would be 5, 6, 7 times the price on the shelves, just sitting there asking to be bought at like 2,000 or 3,000 yen. So I picked up just the one, this Doug Trio by Tomokazu Komiya. One of the earlier cards, which when you look at it, is kind of confusing. Doug Trio is obviously in a whole lot of stress. There's a lot of trees that are just knocked down, so the area is like completely flat. I don't know why they're so stressed, but I like this card, as I do all Komiya cards, and as most people do. They have a very cool art style, and you kind of never know what each illustration is trying to tell you. Next up was another favorite of mine, Dragon Star on level 6. There's a few Dragon Stars in the Nipponbashi area. This one I feel like is the best because they have more vintage than the others, but things might have changed since. It's kind of hard to find. You gotta go down this back alley and then go up an elevator, but once you get in there, you're greeted with a nice little vintage cabinet. Again, with a whole bunch of yellow sticker cards in it. The condition on these was pretty rough, but they were priced accordingly. 100, 200, 300, 400 yen. At that price, when you're trying to build up a strong foundation, it's kind of a no-brainer. So I did end up picking up a few cards in here, not before I continue looking around to see if anything bigger was there. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot, so I ended up opting for a Glaceon by Masakazu Fukuda, which is actually kind of an odd Glaceon the more that you look at it because they're kind of stumpy. This, I'm pretty sure, is from a starter deck, but it was in good condition, so perfect as the first Fukuda card for the trip. Next up was a Piplup, which I'm sure you guys would have seen before. This one is by Kagemaru Himeno, and it's another promo, but it's a cute promo. You can never have too many of these cards, especially with that lovely holo. There was another Himeno card that I picked up, this time the Cranidos, and again, pretty simple illustration. They're kind of floating in a hollow space. It's kind of hard to tell what they're standing on and what's in the background, but the holo goes so hard, and so does the border. So that was a nice little pickup. And then finally, another Himeno card, this time the Magnezone. I'm a sucker for this border. I'm a sucker for this holographic. It's a nice, soft, gentle Magnezone, kind of like an aggressive Pokemon. So a clean pickup. At this point, it was pretty late, so that meant an end to day one, which ultimately was pretty tame. Kind of because I set those limitations early on, but also because I did want one rule to stick by, and that was that I wouldn't go back to any store to pick up any cards. Once I went in and I bought cards and left, that was it, no going back. Whatever I didn't buy, I had to leave on the shelf. I figured with 7 more days to go, I'd have plenty of time to make it up. I could live with the regrets, but looking back, I probably should have bought a bit more on day 1 than I did. So when I woke up the next day to start day 2, I kind of started the day with bad intentions. I wanted to undo the mistakes of the day before. I was heading out there to spend more money, and usually when you head out with an intent to spend a lot of money, you end up buying stuff that you probably shouldn't have. To start the day, we headed to a Mandarake that was actually outside the central Nipponbashi area in Umeda. So Mandarake generally stock a whole lot of vintage cards, predominantly old backs. So they'll have your E-Series holos, your Diamond Pearl Platinum stuff, but for the most part, you're going to be looking at the first few sets, those traditional holos. I did manage to spot a few cards in here, and because I didn't know what was kind of ahead of us, I ended up committing to them earlier, and I probably shouldn't have. The first was this Magnezone, and I was okay with that because I hadn't seen a whole lot of Fukuda cards on the trip so far, and I felt like if I didn't shoot my shot with their cards early, that I was going to end up with a pretty shallow Fukuda collection. The second was this Shiftry by Kagemaru Himeno, and I didn't have any regrets. I wasn't really disappointed having picked this up because it was only 800 yen, and I was still building the binder. Again, I was all about getting a strong foundation early. And I do like this illustration, and I'm a sucker for the holo, but the one that I don't know why I bought was the Ninetales by Atsuko Nishida. It's a beautiful card, but I feel like at 1,500 yen, it was just a little bit overpriced. It is a rare, but it's also not a holographic. And I think as you see the trip continue, this will be one of the weaker buys, but nonetheless, it's a nice card. I guess that was a buy that was like for the content. I was trying to have an excuse to make this video, so I was buying cards that were kind of cool. And that was a mistake that I wasn't going to make again, especially as we headed to the next store, which was Giraful. This time we were back in Namba, and we were in one of probably the most expensive stores in all of Namba. I've heard it's actually gotten worse since this video was originally filmed, but when I went there, yeah, it was expensive. And because it was expensive, that ended up being a rule that I broke almost immediately. I don't know why, but for some reason I felt like I hadn't really fired a shot yet. So I went for some more expensive cards, and this was, I guess, kind of the store to do it at. I hadn't really seen a holo by Tomokazu Komiya yet. So when I saw the Politoed, I was like, you know what? This is probably the card to get. And it's a banger card. It's a beautiful illustration, and I'm pretty sure it's the first holographic by Tomokazu Komiya. So being one of my favorite Pokemon, I was happy with it. Kind of the rationale I had when I picked up the Feraligatr. Again, a beautiful card, a very soft, yet dark depiction of Feraligatr, you know, watercolor style, so it feels very soft, but obviously the pose, the way Feraligatr is looking back is very dark, and the background is very dark. It's got a beautiful holo, and it's one of Nishida's best cards. I'm not disappointed in it. 2,980 yen, maybe a little bit of an overpay. The best buy that I got from this store was by far this promo Pikachu by Masakazu Fukuda. It's not a holo. The stamp has a nice little shine to it, but being a Pikachu card, that was a big plus for me. I've got a personal Pikachu binder back home. And being a Fukuda card, again, I was like, you know, I don't know how many cards I'm going to see by them that aren't super expensive. So when the opportunity arises, you kind of got to go for it. This out of the 3 cards was probably the best buy because it is a promo, but the other 2 I will quickly come to learn were mistakes. And pretty much instantly, as I entered the next store, I regretted picking up both of those cards because Clove in number has an absolutely wild display of vintage cards. At least when I went, it was packed. I don't know what it's like now. Looking back, I'm surprised I didn't buy more cards in here. Just across all of these shelves, easily there would be, you know, 10, 15, 20 cards illustrated by each of the artists that I was trying to build these binders for, and at cheap prices too. You know, when you looked at them, 200, 300, 500 yen. Some of them are more popular, I guess, artists and popular Pokemon at 1,000, 1,500. A big variety of holographics, cards from starter decks, vending series cards. It basically had everything, and I could talk about Clove for ages. It's definitely one of my favorite stores, and I'm looking forward to going back. I stuck to mostly 200, 300, 500 yen cards, with the occasional 1,000 yen card here and there, but ended up picking up a lot of cards by Atsuko Nishida. This beautiful Meowth, some old Gym Heroes cards with the Mankey's Brock there, Erika's Dratini at just 200 yen in such good condition at the front, maybe not so much the back. Ended up buying 3 different Rattata here, 2 by Atsuko Nishida, and then just the one there by Kagemaru Himeno. Some of them vending, some of them from Rocket, just fantastic pickups. Marill here by Atsuko Nishida, another classic with the Lickitung by Kagemaru Himeno, giving me flashbacks to Pokemon Stadium. Some old original Tomokazu Komiya cards with this Doduo here. Another fantastic pickup with the Snubbull looking up at those Butterfree. Such a cute illustration. A classic Eevee by Atsuko Nishida. Seriously, these were all just fantastic pickups. Machoke, vending, 500 yen, one of Komiya's earliest cards. And then that Politoed. Yeah, that's what I was talking about, having big regrets at just 800 yen, a third of the price that I just paid. And because I noticed that, I had to buy it again. So I got 2 of them. Can't complain about that. There was this stunning holographic Erika's Dragonair by Atsuko Nishida. A no-brainer, 960 yen. Perfect on the front, perfect on the back, in my eyes anyway. I'm not grading any of these. These going in a binder. A classic here with the Cleffa by Kagemaru Himeno, one of the most played cards in that OG format of Pokemon. Another Komiya card, this time the Chansey, very warped depiction with 5 eggs there. And finally, Ditto by Atsuko Nishida, a vending series card to wrap it up. 1,400 yen, which meant that it was in pretty good condition, and it was. So a lot of cards there, a lot of money spent, but a lot of restraint. I could have spent way more than I did. So naturally after that, I was feeling pretty good. You know, I spent a lot of money. I bought a lot of really cool cards. The binder felt like it was starting to come to life a bit. So I went into the next store carrying that confidence. And I knew this store was going to have expensive cards because it's one I'd been to before, but I was ready for that. B Honten has a lot of vintage and a lot of E-series. And you guys know how much I love my E-series cards. So I wasn't leaving here unless I walked out with something really flashy. The first time I visited back in 23, they actually had a lot of Delta species, and this time around was no different. So I was really tempted to pick up a bunch of cards, especially because some of those are drawn by Koki Saito, and you might know Koki Saito is one of my favorite artists of all time. I do regret not picking up the Fukuda cards that I did find in here. I think I went in with tunnel vision because I knew that the E-series was going to be good, and I knew that I wanted to buy another E-series card. So I really regret not picking up a big Fukuda card. So I got torn between the Politoed Holo, which is fantastic, by Atsuko Nishida, this VS Espeon from the Theater Limited VS pack, and this Togekiss. Both of those are by Kagemaru Himeno. I didn't go for the Espeon because eventually I do want to buy the sealed Theater Limited pack and get all of those cards in really good condition. But that's about $2,000, so maybe one day. I was leaning towards the Togekiss, but Politoed, being one of my favorite Pokemon, meant that it won out, so ended up picking that one up. Atsuko Nishida with a fantastic depiction here of Politoed, just looking up. It's something about the eyes. I think it kind of reminds me of my sausage dog, Lola, just the way that they're looking up. It's so cute. The holo is fantastic on these cards. The colors pop, the green with the blue. It's just one of my favorite cards. So absolutely zero regrets picking this up. The condition was fantastic. It looks good in the binder. It was a great pickup. There were a few Komiya cards here. One that I probably should have picked up was the Charmeleon, but I ended up going for this Cleffa at 380 yen, which in hindsight was actually kind of expensive, but it was just about getting the ball rolling. You know, I wanted to carry some momentum. Speaking of momentum, I couldn't have got this far on the trip without the help of Volt X, the sponsor of this video. Seriously, when it comes to TCG accessories, they can't be beat with some of the best colors and styles in the game. And they have a massive TCG accessory range too, which is great if you're a competitive player. Whenever I head to tournaments, I'm always repping their gear because it's just rock solid at protecting your deck. They've got everything from binders to sleeves to deck boxes, which are all modular by the way, so you can mix and match their pastel range of colors with some cool combos. And you can save 10% off their whole range with code OKJLove10 down below. Now, back to the card stores. We ended up moving through a few more stores through Nippon Bashi, but I didn't find many cards as part of the collections that I was chasing until eventually we got to another Mandarake, and I knew I'd find something in here given how much vintage Mandarake typically stock. Having said that, a lot of the cards that I was looking at were cards that I'd seen in other stores. You know, the Delibird by Komiya, I'd seen at least 3 or 4 times at this point. I hadn't seen any cards by Masakazu Fukuda for a while, so they did eventually pop up again. And there were a ton of E-series cards, which meant a bunch of illustrations by Kagemaru Himeno and Atsuko Nishida. And this is where I made a critical error on the trip that I'm still thinking about. A lot of demons from this trip. So I was tossing up between this Rapidash and this Meganium, both of them by Kagemaru Himeno. But at the time, I didn't realize that the Meganium was way rarer or a little bit harder to find because it comes from a starter deck, whereas the Rapidash is just from the regular set. And of course, me in my infinite wisdom, yeah, I went for the Rapidash. And I didn't realize this until I was editing the video and I was looking at the Meganium and I was thinking, why didn't I pick that up? It just seemed like a no-brainer. Clearly, I'm still bitter about it, but I know that at the time I wasn't thinking straight in this store because 2 of the cards I picked up, I'd actually already bought before. The Magnezone, I actually bought at the start of the day. So I got 2 of those. That was a silly purchase. The Doug Trio, one of the first cards that I bought. Again, why did I buy it? I don't know. I think I was just panicking. The 2 cards that I hadn't seen before though, they were good pickups. There was a Jigglypuff here about Atsuko Nishida. Very soft and gentle card there on the beach. So a cute pickup. And probably the best card that I bought from this store was the Murkrow by Atsuko Nishida. Again, being a Diamond Pearl Platinum card, some of my favorite illustrations. I love the holographic on them, and this one has a swirl. They just know how to make Pokemon feel really soft, even if they're supposed to be menacing. I feel like all my terrible decisions happen in Mandarake, something that you're probably going to see a little bit more of as the trip goes on. But there was one more store to visit on day 2, which was one of my favorites, and it was another B. There were plenty of vintage cards in here. I think because it's a sister store to the other B, they put a lot of the cheaper or more damaged cards in here, which means if you're building an artist binder or Pokedex binder, there's a whole bunch more to sift through without the big price tag. I actually bought a ton of cards here by Hajime Kusujima. That's another artist that I've got a bit of personal collection growing back home, and with most of them just $1 or $2, it was a bit of a no-brainer. But I didn't get distracted and I found some really slick cards for the artists that I was focusing on, like this Moltres by Kagemaru Himeno. And I'm surprised this isn't a holo. The more that I look at it, the more I think about it, it feels like it naturally should just be a holo. A few cards by Himeno actually, this really cheap Smeagol for just 80 yen, practically free. You really can't ask for much more when you're trying to build cards for an artist like Kagemaru Himeno. 80 yen, it's wild, and it's a fantastic illustration. And then on top of that, the Wobbuffet, another McDonald's promo, and 1280 yen, no brainer. Whenever you see a promo for that cheap, it's almost like an automatic pickup. There was a Lilip, again, 80 yen, so cheap, an automatic pickup. And I gotta say, this is a Pokemon that I didn't really like that much upon initial reveal, but slowly grown on me, especially with cards like this. This Hitmontop by Komiya felt like an absolute steal. Again, 180 yen. E-series, a legendary artist. Make it make sense, you know? Make it make sense. And then probably the best pickup from this store, the Arcanine by Masakazu Fukuda. And I'm sure you can tell as this trip has gone on, their cards are going to be the hardest to find. So a classic Pokemon, a Gen 1 favorite, a legendary artist, and a beautiful holo, 1280 yen, it was a no-brainer. This whole store was a no-brainer. Day 2 in its entirety was a no-brainer. Partly because I didn't use my brain properly with some of those pickups, and then partly because I found some absolute bangers. Day 3, and the next stop, Kobe. Just a quick train ride from Osaka. And I actually had planned to do a full walkthrough of Kobe, but it never came to fruition. So everything you see here is fresh footage. That's kind of cool. All the best stores in Kobe are concentrated in this mall-like area called Sannomiya Center-gai. It's kind of hit and miss, like you're going to see in this first store. Trading card shop, Big Bang. They had a few nice Pikachu cards, but it was mostly modern stuff in here. The Trainer Magazine Evolution promos were nice, but a bit expensive and not what I was exactly after today. Really quickly though, you'll come across another Dragon Star, and Dragon Star, they're pretty reliable all through Japan. They tend to have a good range of modern and vintage cards, especially yellow sticker cards. This branch though was lacking on the vintage side. There wasn't a whole lot. You know, when you compare it to a C Labo, a Book Off, a Mandarake, it just doesn't compete. This reverse holo Twins by Kanaka Ale really caught my eye, but that was for another collection. I wanted to start the day right, focusing on the binders that I was building. Ultimately, I settled on The God of War by Atsuko Nishida. Just the one card, but at 470 yen, pretty good for a shiny collection card. Those sealed boxes, they sell for a pretty penny. Kind of just needed something to kick us off. Moving on, we eventually came to a store called Toraka Park. Now, the selection here, very hit and miss. You know how I was saying no cohesiveness to the vintage selection in Dragon Star? Yeah, this store was way worse, but that doesn't mean that you can't find stuff. Honestly, my only gripe with stores like this is that when you get to them, you have to spend way more time sifting through the shelves to find something. But if you're committed to the game, if you're doing this for the love of the game, there's no issue with that. And after a good 15 minutes of looking, I ended up finding some good cards. Actually, get a load of this. The 4 cards that I bought, they're all grass type, so that's kind of cool. A beautiful Blossom by Atsuko Nishida, a timeless illustration, a classic Gen 2 Pokemon, and a beautiful holo. This was a great pickup at 1200 yen. You can't say no to that. One of the weirder cards that I bought on the trip, Genesect, Cracked Ice Holo by Masakazu Fukuda. Look, the Fukuda binder was really struggling. I was barely seeing any of their cards on the shelves. 1700 yen, probably not a great price, but I just needed to get something in the binder, you know? We were in Struggle Town. I had to buy this. I had no choice. The Kagemaru Himeno stocks would not stop rising with this Dark Gloom, 380 yen. A great pickup. It's in fantastic condition. It's that classic style. It is very retro. And I think this was the first time I'd seen this card on the shelf. Light Ledian by Tomokazu Komiya. Beautiful depiction of them in the middle of the night, that full moon, basically radiating, reflection of the moon glowing. I'm very happy with this. It was a weird store. There were weird pickups, but we were moving. We were making progress. The binder was getting cards in it. That's all you can ask for. A really popular store that you're going to see all across Japan is Prezi. Whichever one it is, it's cool because they have a lot of vintage and they're tax-free. It was mostly modern, but the vintage did cross over multiple eras. And there were a lot of different cards that caught my eye. This Starmie by Midori Harada, 300 yen, Delta species. Pretty cool card, one that I hadn't seen a whole lot on the trip. But as usual, I gravitate to E-series, which means I'm gravitating to Nishida and Himeno cards. And there were a few here, but I felt like I had to give Komiya some love. You know, I hadn't really picked up many big Komiya cards, just the one holographic with the Politoed. So I went for the Pidgeot. It seemed like a smart buy. Looking back, I feel like I should have bought the Suicune there, but I had been buying a lot of Nishida cards, so I don't feel too bad leaving it behind. And then right as we were leaving, I spotted this Clefable by Masakazu Fukuda. So the Fukuda stocks were rising. They were getting a lot of love in Kobe. The binder was building. I love the holo here. And I've always liked how Heart Gold, Soul Silver cards have a bigger portrait. As you move through Sannomiya Sentai, you're going to see a lot of different stores, mostly stocking modern, nothing particularly outstanding. There are cool displays and stalls as you go through. With one store there even selling a whole bunch of English cards and sealed. Surely that is worth a fortune now. There's a yellow submarine hidden here too, but the selection at the time, very, very average. The condition was absolutely terrible. There was this Squirtle that I wanted to buy, but that thing was butchered, so left it behind. Worth a quick look, but nothing in there to help with my binder. It wasn't until we got to Mint where things started to pick up again. This store was decked out with vintage and quality stuff too. Not just raw, but slabs as well. A lot of early cards, early illustrations by these artists, like that Delibird by Tomokazu Komiya. I feel like that was like the 5th time I'd come across it and I was still refusing to buy it. Of course, there was a whole bunch of E-series, which at that point was just starting to stress me out, you know? It's putting a strain on my personal goals. It's putting a strain on my binder collection. It's putting a strain on my wallet. Every time I see E-series, I feel like I got to spend money. The Kingdra here by Atsuko Nishida felt like a must buy at 4,400 yen. You know, that's pretty good for a raw E-series holo. But the one card that I was really laboring over in here was this holo Rapidash by Kagemaru Himeno. I don't know what it was about Rapidash cards on this trip, but they were killing me. The price tag on this one was steep, which made me feel like there were probably better options out there, but I hadn't really fired a shot here in Kobe, so I ended up buying it. And then in the cabinet just underneath it, I saw this really cute Chimchar holo for just 280 yen, and it was by Masakazu Fukuda. So their stocks were at an all-time high. This was probably the best day for the Fukuda component of the binder. This was a great pickup. Honestly, I don't know why this was so cheap. What were they thinking? I'm an absolute sucker for this Kingdra by Atsuko Nishida. It is so good. Pose, the watercolor style, everything about this card. I'm not gonna lie, out of the 4 artists, there's probably a little bit of bias to Atsuko Nishida cards. They have a huge advantage having drawn so many E-series holos, but I can't deny who I am. I love these cards. And then the Rapidash by Kagemaru Himeno. You know, honestly, I'm just kind of happy to have a fancier, you know, a flashier Himeno card in the collection. I feel like up to this point, I'd bought like a lot of commons and uncommons. So to get a cool, big, maybe like elusive card in good condition too, it felt good. Even though I labored over it, ultimately it felt good. And I love the card. I love the holo. Having said all that, Kobe, kind of disappointing, especially when you compare it to Osaka. Variety just isn't there. The prices, they were high. I did walk away with 10 cards, so you can't complain about that. The Fukuda binder, it got beefed up a little bit. It really needed it, but overall, it was an okay day. Day 4, yeah. Feeling good, you know, had like 50, 60 cards in the binder. I hadn't spent too much and we were heading to Kyoto. This is another city that I'd planned to make a video for. So a fresh batch of stores for you guys to look at. First of those being a Giraful branch, which you're probably assuming is going to have a bunch of vintage, but unfortunately this one was severely lacking. It was mostly modern, which was disappointing, and the prices were very high. I don't think I saw a vintage card by any of the illustrators that I was chasing, so quickly moved on. The next store was a branch that I hadn't had a bunch of success with, but was worth checking out, Yellow Submarine. The first thing you're gonna see when you walk in are a bunch of cabinets stocking modern, but the real nectar was on top. Now, I usually avoid the bulk boxes in stores because I feel like everybody's kind of gone through them already, but I had nothing to lose. I felt like Kyoto was going to be slow, so I went for it. And it didn't disappoint. Meowth by Atsuko Nishida from Here Comes Team Rocket, a classic illustration, very soft. A card I'd already bought, but we got 2 of them, so we take that. Speaking of having 2 of them, Mareep, again by Atsuko Nishida, this time moving into Neo. I really like this one. If you have a cute binder, you're probably going to have a lot of Nishida cards in it. Would you look at that? Another Atsuko Nishida card. This time it is Smoochum. And I feel like this was the only Smoochum I saw on the whole trip. But at 100 yen, it's a no-brainer. Paris by Kagemaru Himeno. You're going to see a lot of early illustrations by them. You know, I feel like this was actually digital. Very, very early digital. I know a lot of Pokemon card illustrators experimented with digital as soon as it became, I guess, relevant. I've got the feeling that this was not hand-drawn, even though it looks like it. A companion for my Ledian. This is the Ledibar by Tomokazu Komiya. Not as confident as the Ledian, a little bit sadder. In the spotlight too, just in that weird spot in the forest, hiding behind the rock. I don't know why they're so sad. Maybe they're getting beat up. Tends to happen to bug Pokemon, but it's a beautiful card. Some Gym Heroes love. This time we got Blaine's Mankey by Atsuko Nishida. And speaking of classic trad cards, Omanyte from Fossil by Kagemaru Himeno, a timeless card, one that we saw many times in the playground in Greece. That's the first time I've noticed that. Are they meant to be in Greece? That's crazy. I never noticed that. 8 cards for the binder, all under $10. Huge dub. I feel like the binder so far has Atsuko Nishida in the lead, and then Kagemaru Himeno very, very closely behind that. Tomokazu Komiya at 3rd, and then way at the back, Masakazu Fukuda. Really struggling. Not by choice. It's just their cards seem to be the hardest to come across in Japan, and their chase cards are really expensive. So anytime you see a Fukuda card, you kind of just got to grab it, eh? Moving through the main Kyoto Kawaramachi area were a bunch of stores. Some that I visited for like 5 seconds and barely filmed in, like Amenity Dream, and then some that would be really good, like Book Off Plus. But ultimately, we're kind of just lacking in the condition and price department. It didn't really meet that sweet spot where you're willing to pay for the card even though it's damaged. Just a little bit too expensive for a damaged card. Torokar Capital on the corner at level 6 was a very fun visit. I actually made a video walking through this entire store. Plenty of cards to sift through across modern and vintage, but nothing that I'd ultimately commit to. I don't know. I felt like if I was going to spend 10,000 yen on a card, I had to really, really want it. I didn't want to just spend on an expensive card for the sake of it. I feel like I'd already been burned by that in day 2. That was about it for the Kawaramachi area. So then after a very long walk to Kyoto Station, ended up coming across a Sea Labo. Once again, Modern stole the limelight here with huge range across recent sets. Sword and Shield, Sun and Moon. There was basically everything here. The vintage range was very strong though, across multiple generations. Everything from Prime cards to Legends, and then probably the first Gold Star that I'd seen on the trip with this Metagross for 30,000 yen. Honestly, if this wasn't a yellow sticker card and it was in a bit better condition, I probably would have bought it, even if that meant that it was more expensive. But spending that much on a card that was kind of damaged for a Gold Star, it didn't feel right, so I left that one behind. They had a ton of Eevee Heroes special arts. They were all slightly damaged and reduced, but you know, looking back, those were good deals. After searching through cards for what felt like ages, coming across some Fukuda movie promos, which I already had, and some lovely Pikachu cards by Atsuko Nishida, I eventually landed on this Houndour by Kagemaru Himeno for a few reasons. One, it was a promo card, and I feel like you don't really come across holo Legends promo cards from 2010 that often. Two, like I said, it was a Legend card, and the border on those, mint. And then three, it just looked cool, so I picked it up. I feel like this is the kind of card you won't really see that often, so if you find it in good condition and you're chasing it for a reason, whether it's the Pokemon or the artist, you kind of just got to go for it. With that, it was time to move on to an Aeon Mall that had a hobby station up the top. This place primarily had a modern range, but there was a cabinet with some older, cheaper cards, and they were mostly yellow sticker, which meant they were mostly beat up, so I didn't want to spend too much here. 600 yen for the Jirachi seemed good, but 600 yen also got me 6 cards at Yellow Submarine earlier, so my mindset had started to change here. It had been a while since I'd bought a Komiya card, so I went for this Camerupt, which I actually already had back home, but we move. And a hidden Gorbis by Atsuko Nishida. You know, when I look at this Gorbis, I gotta say, I just don't feel anything. It's just kind of like a whatever Pokemon. It's obviously an Atsuko Nishida card. You can tell from the art style. It's very soft. It's gentle. The holo is cool, but it's just, I'm not feeling anything. And to be honest, as far as Tomokazu Komiya cards go, this is tame. I'm not really learning a whole lot. Kagemaru looks like they're about to stomp me, which is kind of weird. They've got better cards, and that's okay. It's okay to say that. Closing time for a lot of these stores was quickly approaching, and I had to get a train back to Osaka, so I had time for one more store. A few blocks away from Kyoto Station, there actually is a Giraful, which I thought was going to have a lot of good pickups. But heading in, it ended up being mostly modern, with very, very few vintage cards to choose from. Now, I did see this Dark Houndoom for 2,980 yen, which was very tempting, but I was certain that I had seen it before, so I let it go. And I feel like that was probably one of the smartest decisions I'd made on the trip. But after heading back to Osaka, I broke the only rule that I was sticking to on the entire trip. I went back to another store. Look, Clove was really good to me the first time around, and I knew I'd seen that Dark Houndoom somewhere before, and I was right. I saw it in the Clove for 2,000 yen. That's why I left it at Giraful. That's why I came back. I feel like on technicality, this is okay. And I thought, hey, I'm already here. You know, I'm already buying cards in Clove. I might as well buy some more cards. What's another 1, 2, 3, 4, you know? The starter deck Arcanine there, 4,000 yen, Kagemaru Himeno. Tempted, but I didn't buy it. Probably should have. The Slowpoke by Komiya, 200 yen, obvious buy. Didn't buy it, probably should have. And would you look at that, the Rapidash that I'd bought the day before in Colbert, 4,500 yen, way cheaper, probably better condition. Love that for me. I really, really wanted to have a look at this Dark Espeon by Atsuko Nishida, but if I was gonna spend 25,000 yen on anything, I wanted it to be on something huge. Look, this kind of did tick those boxes, but I had a few days left. I let it sit. Ultimately, I walked out with the Dark Houndoom by Kagemaru Himeno. What a fantastic card. I feel like the vines in this, twirling around, just such a nice feature. I don't know where they're coming from. Probably from the Pokemon that they're battling, which could make sense. But it's a great card. I love how they're coming from the left to the flames. It's just so good. And that holo, 2,000 yen, make it make sense. Ride On by Tomokazu Komiya, another vending series card. You know, anytime you find a Komiya card for that cheap, you just got to get it, because when else are you going to see it like that? Erika's Oddish by Atsuko Nishida. Very dark, very brooding card. A very evil looking Oddish, almost camouflage there into the soil. Booba, just blowing some flames there. Nothing really special, not gonna lie, it's a pretty tame card. 200 yen for a vending series, you take that. And that wrapped up 4 days across 4 different locations with something like 70 cards picked up. You know, I love Osaka, Hyogo, Kyoto Prefecture, but one place that I can't get enough of, Nagoya. At the end of 2024, I took you guys through a massive journey through the hidden card stores of Nagoya. And it was here where I boosted my artist collections in a way that honestly, I never could have imagined. Day 5 brings us to Nagoya. Dragon Star Nagoya to be specific. Now, in that video, I spoke a bit about how this Dragon Star was pretty terrible. Not because they wouldn't let me film, but because the prices were ridiculously high. But what I didn't tell you was that inside I found 2 crazy bargains. Not just one, but 2 copies of Light Dragonair by Atsuko Nishida. Now, when you see opportunities like that, you take them. And it really is a Light Dragonair. It's so soft. It's so gentle. It just feels so delicate and serene, just lightly kissing whatever water that they're they're landing in or that they're sitting in, sending a ripple through it. Perfect depiction of Dragonair. Probably one of Atsuko Nishida's best cards. Each of those were 1500 yen, so all things considered, a great start to the Nagoya leg of the trip. In the same Nagoya station area, you'll find a Sea Labo Satellite, which had a massive range of vintage and modern. I reckon I spent like an hour here just trying to find bargains because there were 2 aisles full of cards. And this was probably the most indecisive I felt on the whole trip. In terms of the more expensive cards, that light Arcanine caught my eye, but it just felt a little bit too pricey for the condition that it was in. The light Dragonite looked very good, also by Atsuko Nishida, but again, just hesitant to spend a lot this early for this part of the trip. The Dark Espeon that I'd previously seen for 25,000 yen seemed like a pretty good deal at 7,000 yen, but chances were I'd probably see these same 3 again cheaper. There was a Mew by Hajime Kusajima. Again, another personal collection, but a bit of a distraction and way too expensive. I did see that Pidgeot by Tomokazu Komiya for 2,000 yen more than I paid, so that made me feel a little bit better, you know, getting some wins back here and there. There were a bunch of cards to choose from, honestly too much, but I didn't want to leave empty-handed after spending so much time browsing, so I played it safe. I grabbed the Dark Vileplume by Kagemaru Himeno, lovely holo, a traditional card. You can't really go wrong with stuff like this for 1500 yen. Added it to the binder. And then another very cool card by Kagemaru Himeno, the Ice Sky Shaman. This is a cool card. I like the background. It's a bit dynamic. They're kind of in movement. There's some snow there. Holo all across the card and the border. So that's a fantastic pickup. 500 yen. From here, we moved on to Osu, which is kind of like the heart of Pokemon cards in Nagoya. TCG Shop 193 had plenty of vintage to choose from, especially for the artists I was chasing. This Togekiss by Kagemaru Himeno. Sadly damaged though, so I didn't pick that one up. The Growlithe by Tomokazu Komiya, Sleeping. Very cute card. Probably should have picked that up, but I didn't. Like many cards in this shop, that's fine. Just a few blocks down the road is Surugaya, and they got a lot of vintage too. In fact, I spent a lot of time here, mostly filming. But while I was filming, I was bookmarking a bunch of cards to come back and buy later. Technically, that wasn't breaking my rule because we were on a bit of time constraint this day. You know, I just was filming. I was like, I'll come back and buy it. Dark Slowking by Tomokazu Komiya, 1,000 yen. That's a bargain. Erika's Clefairy by Atsuko Nishida. Giovanni's Nidoking, another beautiful card. Butterfree by Kagemaru Himeno. That is a classic. Vulpix by Atsuko Nishida. Slowpoke, Tomokazu Komiya, all fantastic cards that ultimately I never came back and bought. So I forgot about it. I didn't get any of these and I really regret it. So as we made our way through the rest of Osu, we hit up a bunch of different stores until eventually we got to Wonderliz 2. And this is a funny store, not because of the cards for sale, but because of what happened inside. I love this store. This was probably my favorite store that we visited on the whole trip because at the back there was this cabinet and it was basically the motherlode. You guys know that I love Diamond, Pearl, Platinum cards. I love the holo on them. And this cabinet was chock full of them. So when I walked in, I was like, we're on. Like, I am going to get a bunch of mint cards. And the prices were ridiculous. We're talking like 500 yen to 1,000, 2,000. Some of them were like 9,000, 10,000 yen. But for the most part, everything was like sub $20 or $30. Thing is, I was with a couple of guys who run card stores. You know, you might know of one, Pokemon Steven, good friend of mine, Buckner. Love the dude. But before I could even get to any of these cards, before I could barely film them, this cabinet got cleaned out. There was a Mew in there for 780 yen. I will never understand why that Mew was 780 yen. But before I could get to it, it was gone. And there were 2 other ones like it, except they were 9,800 yen and I just couldn't bring myself to buy that. When eventually I did get access to the cabinet after it had been practically cleaned out, I did manage to find some cool cards. That Delibird was there again and I still wouldn't buy it because I knew I was going to see it again. There was a Tyranitar here by Masakazu Fukuda. I don't know why I didn't buy this. I'm just going to tell you right now. I didn't buy it. I don't have it. What was I thinking? Maybe it was because the selection was overwhelming because there was so many cards, not just for the artists I was chasing, but for the collections I had back home. So many Dark, so many Team Rocket cards by Kokusaito, Hajime Kusajima. I was overwhelmed. But like I said, after it had been cleaned out and I got my bearings back, I did manage to find a few solid cards, all below 2,000 yen. Pillow Swine by Tomokazu Komiya, a pretty traditional card, not a whole lot going on. They're kind of sweating a little bit and the sun's rising. So what are they rushing for? That I can't tell. But at 1,500 yen, that was a good pickup. One of my absolute favorite Pokemon by one of my favorite artists, Atsuko Nishida, Ampharos. Love this one so much. If you have a cute binder, this is a great addition. The holo on it, fantastic. So I was happy with that. For the traditionalists out there, we got some Gen 1 love here with Snorlax by Kagemaru Himeno. And this is a good card. This is like an old school traditional Pokemon card. You know, no extravagant illustration, just Snorlax chilling, smiling, looking up. It's nostalgic. When you look at it, it's hard to explain, but you get that feeling from it. This was a card I'd already picked up. In fact, I think this was like one of the first cards that I bought on the trip. Blastoise by Kagemaru Himeno, but I just couldn't overlook it. Had to grab it again. 2,000 yen, that was a good pickup. I liked this a lot actually because one of my favorite Pokemon, Politoed, and because it was Masakazu Fukuda. That binder was struggling. This was a great addition to it. I felt like this was really cheap for a legendary artist for a holo as well. So I was stoked to pick this one up. This is so in line with Masakazu Fukuda's traditional illustrations. If this was like a gold star, you know that it would be like a 1,000 or 2,000 yen card. You take that away and the illustrations are just as good as each other. This one's got a swirl on it, so that's kind of cool. And the same thing follows for this card as it does for the Politoed. Nothing really separating this style of illustration from any of their other cards that are worth upwards of $5,000–$10,000. So I love this one a lot. And again, I'm an absolute sucker for that Diamond Pearl Platinum Holo style. Easily could have spent like $200, $300, $400 in this store if the others didn't get to the cabinet. You know, things happen for a reason. That's the game. Be like that sometimes. Good tidings were coming my way. I knew it. I could feel it. Maybe even a little sooner than I expected because the next store, Clove, delivered in a way I wouldn't have anticipated. Because walking in, it was quickly apparent there was no vintage in here. This was all modern. That is a terrible, terrible omen. But after getting absolutely mogged at Wonderlands, I was determined to walk out of here with something. So I had no choice but to ask the employees if they had some cards in the back room. And to my surprise, they actually did. And the cards they came out with were stunners. And they were all unpriced too. So went through, sifted, picked out the ones I liked, got some prices, and there were some good pickups here. The Masakazu Fukuda part of the binder was struggling on this trip. You don't need me to say it again, but my prayers were answered and I got 3 cards by the legend here. First up, Torterra. Again, this could be a gold star and bang, $1 million. Beautiful holo, Diamond Pearl Platinum, I'm a sucker. That same signature style with the Regigigas, another Fukuda classic, added to the binder, 400 yen. You gotta admit that that is crazy. This card is practically in mint condition, but I guess at the time, the Japanese just don't really value them. And for me, that's in the binder, baby. And hey, why not? I think I already had 2 of this card. Why not get it a 3rd time? Maybe I can trade it. I don't know. 3 Magnazone's crazy, dude. Also picked up a very pretty Frostlass by Atsuko Nishida in that signature style. I cannot get enough of the Diamond Pearl Platinum Holo. It complements this style of illustration perfectly. And I think that's what makes it so appealing to me, is that the holographic kind of ties into the illustration. Whereas these days, it just feels like the holo's slapped on top and there's no real unity between them. Same thing goes for the Shaman by Kagemaru Himeno. Exact same vibe. The holographic feels like part of the card. It feels part of the background. You got the flower bed there. A couple of swirls there too, so that's nice. And another fantastic addition for just 400 yen. 14 cards, 1 day, 17,000 yen. Masakazu Fukuda binder eating good. Himeno stocks up. Nishida stocks up. Komiya probably could have been a bit better. Look, it was a good first day in Nagoya, but we still had one more day here and we didn't have a whole lot of time. So to kick off day 6, we got up early and made our way to Magi at the Parko Mall. And while they did have some cool cards that I picked up, ultimately there was nothing for the illustrated collection. So it was a long walk back to visit Mandarake, who'd surely deliver. And with this much vintage on display, I knew I'd came to the right spot. As usual, Atsuko Nishida and Kagemaru Himeno took up the most shelf space with a bunch of solid selections here. There was this really clean Hajime Kusajima card that I wanted to pick up, but I felt like I'd spent too much on the trip already and I didn't want to deviate too far from the artist collection, so I left this one behind. This Pikachu by Atsuko Nishida would have been a great pickup because it was a vending series card. You rarely see them on the shelves and in good condition, but I didn't buy this one. I think it was because I didn't notice it at the time. It wasn't till I was reviewing the footage, which is a really painful part of looking back on your trip. Almost as painful as seeing a card that you'd already bought for basically half the price. This Kingdra was there and I couldn't bring myself to look at the condition of it. I knew that it was basically as good, if not better, but it is what it is. This Trainer Magazine Smiggle would have been a nice pickup on the Tomokazu Komiya side of things, but I think I already had it back home, so I skipped that one too. I skipped a lot of cards here in the end, walking away with just the 3. 1 each from Masakazu Fukuda, Atsuko Nishida, and Kagemaru Himeno. We had the Mamoswine by Himeno-san. Great card. Again, Diamond Pearl Platinum ticks all my boxes. I love the holographic on the border on these. It's just such a perfect card. It doesn't need to do anything more than it already is. So that was pretty good pickup for 300 yen. The Executor by Masakazu Fukuda. I hadn't seen many commons by Fukuda-san on the trip, so this was another great pickup. I feel like this could have been a holo. It doesn't need to be, but at 400 yen, a no-brainer. And probably like the 3rd or 4th Shaman card that I picked up on the trip so far. This one by Atsuko Nishida. Really soft, much like their really early cards. So I like like this a lot. This is 2008, which makes a bit of sense. Again, the holos just tick all my boxes. Doesn't need to be anything extravagant in the background. It's perfect as it is. The next stop was Toraka Camp. If you see my video from Nagoya or my video covering this entire store, you'll know that it's basically like a Pokemon card museum, but it doesn't exist anymore. It actually fused with another store in Nagoya that I'm gonna get to soon. They basically have cards from every single generation in fantastic condition. Yeah, you're probably paying a little bit of a premium, but it's rare that you'll come to a store that has so many cards from so many different generations all in the one spot in great condition. There were probably 50 cards from each of the artists I was trying to build a binders for in this store alone, if not more. But in the end, I only walked away with 3. This was actually the first time I'd seen Beedrill by Tomokazu Komiya from the VS set. So that was an instant pickup at 280 yen, one of their very early cards. I found this Starmie by Masakazu Fukuda, Delta Species. At this point in the trip, anytime I saw a card by Masakazu Fukuda, I was just picking it up, whether it was a holo or a common. As far as Delta Species cards go, this one wasn't too off center. It was in pretty good condition as well. And like I've been saying, every time I look at a card by Fukuda-san, that style is just so consistent. It doesn't matter whether it's a rare card or a common. It's just fantastic. It's timeless. And another absolute steal with the Lickitung, Delta Species by Masakazu Fukuda, 380 yen. You see what I mean? This one is rare, but it's a non-holographic and it looks just as good. Perfect depiction of Lickitung with the tongue wide and spread out like that. That made it sound kind of weird. This left just one more store in Nagoya and probably the greatest store for this binder journey that I was on. Dice Roll was a dream, a very distant dream though, because the form that I visited in doesn't exist anymore, having fused with Toraka Camp. But the fleeting moments that we shared together here will stay with me forever. This place, it's like a love letter to Pokemon cards with posters and memorabilia spanning decades across the wall. This place has everything. The cabinets were filled with modern and vintage. They had plenty of slabs and there was some really nice sealed stuff too. On top of that, they had a lot of cards from different artists that I was collecting or wanted to start collecting, but I had to stay focused. I probably would have spent like 40 minutes sifting through all the cards in the cabinet, but I couldn't really settle on anything. The biggest standout was probably the Touch Generation by Tomokazu Komiya at 8,900 yen, but I'd seen that back in Osaka for 2,000 yen, so I didn't actually pick this up. But with this much stuff going on in the store, I knew that it had to have the goods. So I asked the owner, did you have any commons? Did you have any uncommons you can share with us? And man, did they deliver. I reckon if I had to go through each of these cards one by one, it would probably be another 40-minute video. They had so much bulk, and it was for every single artist that I was chasing here. As I go through this stack and I look at the artists of the cards that I picked up, it was crazy. Like this was basically everything that I was looking for just like as much bulk as I could, just cards to get like a really, really strong foundation across a bunch of different generations. And as you look at it, you realize I just hit the mother lode because a lot of these cards are from the start of these artists' career, from sets that are difficult to find in really good condition. Now, for the most part, they're in good condition. You know, would it be gradable? But for what I'm doing, I don't really care about that. But looking at the fronts, the backs, like it just kept going. Like I sifted through the bulk boxes that they were sharing with me. It probably would have been like an hour because there was just so much to go through and I was trying to find as many cards by the artists as I could. And I feel like just looking at this stack, if I count it, it's definitely a stack of at least 100. We went through, they priced them. They had like a mat. You've probably seen them in card stores before. And I was paying anywhere between 80 yen per card to like 500 yen per card. You know, more popular Pokemon like Psyduck, Magikarp, Salamence, they were going to chase a higher price, but I'm more than happy to pay that if I can see it physically in store, especially from a store that's like helping me because they don't need to do this. They don't need to share their bulk with us, but hey, they did. And it just filled the binder out perfectly. The more I look at this stack, the more excited and happier I get. So it was super lucky in Dice Roll, really bolstered the collection. If I hadn't visited Dice Roll and I hadn't bought these cards, the binder wouldn't be looking anywhere near as good as it does now. Probably the best part of Nagoya was just finding so many Masakazu Fukuda cards. I was really struggling in the early parts of the trip and thinking that it was just going to be too hard unless I started buying gold stars and stuff. But especially in the last day, finding all those commons, uncommons helped out massively. With that, it was time to say goodbye to Nagoya with one final day spent speedrunning Tokyo. This was the last day that I had in Japan, so I had to be really selective about the stores that I visited, the time I spent in them, and and of course the cards that I picked up. So far, I think I'd really treated myself when it came to Kagemaru Himeno cards, having picked up that Rapidash and that Houndour for both over 6,000 yen. But I hadn't really gone all out for Tomokazu Komiya, Atsuko Nishida, and Masakazu Fukuda yet. As we'd already established, Fukuda was kind of out of the question with most of their chase cards being over 20,000 yen. And with Tomokazu Komiya being a really popular artist, finding their high tier cards felt almost impossible. So I feel like that left Atsuko Nishida as the final artist for one big spend. The first city we visited to kick off day 7 was Ikebukuro, and the first store that I visited was Mint. They wouldn't let me film in here, that's cool. Everything was mostly overpriced, but I did manage to pick up this Pokemon March by Tomokazu Komiya. So a pretty good pickup, and I think this is one of their first cards. Yep, I actually just looked it up and it is literally their first cards. That was a great pickup at 200 yen. If you've ever DM'd me asking for store recommendations in Tokyo, then you're probably gonna know the next store, Nin. I'd say this is probably the best store in Ikebukuro, and the secret's kind of out. Most people know about it anyway. Tons of vintage across a bunch of generations. When I visited, they had a lot of no rarity cards, which is kind of cool, but yeah, obviously those were out of the budget and not really part of what I was doing. This is another one of those stores where there were probably like 10 or 20 cards from the artists that I was chasing, which made it really difficult to pick something. The staff in this store was super nice, so I ended up walking away with 6 cards. The first was Dalcati by Atsuko Nishida, and I love this one. An early holo by them, but a really smart card. The foreground of the flowers, Dalcati just behind them, and then the holo really adds this layer of depth. I like how there's no holo over the flowers. That's a classic Atsuko Nishida illustration. I got this rufflet by Tomokazu Komiya. Again, just a no-brainer. And actually looking at it, I think this is a reverse holo. So that was a solid pickup for 280 yen. Some more Kagemaru Himeno love with a Raichu this time. And again, it's a classic illustration. They're a fantastic artist, and that's that holo again from Diamond Pearl Platinum. Can't get enough of it. Another very early holographic by Tomokazu Komiya with this Loudred. You can barely see it, but it is there. I like this a lot. I like how Loudred takes up basically the entire frame of the card, and this guy's got 4 attacks, which is crazy. Another holo by Kagemaru Himeno that kind of flew under the radar, Mothim. It's really easy to go after their more expensive high-end cards and then overlook stuff like this because it's not really a popular Pokemon, but the illustrations are just as good. And a cheeky little holographic by Masakazu Fukuda with Tangrowth. Another great pickup. And look at that, 600 yen for an illustration by Fukuda-san. Just too good. At this point, it was probably like 5 p.m. and there was one store that I really wanted to visit before the trip was over. So I headed over to Akihabara. I hadn't actually visited Akihabara since 2023. So I did want to do a bit of exploring. And amidst that exploring, I found a store I hadn't visited before named Play Gym. This is another place that I would have recommended it if you DM'd me. And I really liked it because it was a player-focused store, but they did have a bunch of vintage across generations. Now, I don't want this to sound like I'm adding like artificial stakes to the end of the video, but being the end of the trip, I was starting to rush and overlook a bunch of stuff. And looking back at the footage there was some really good cards that I didn't pick up here. Stuff for my Koki Saito collection and a bunch of cards for my VS binder. There was no one single card in here that I wanted to spend a whole lot of money on, but there were a bunch of cheap cards that I really wanted to buy. So this is where I made a couple of executive decisions. The first was buying all of these trainer cards by Kanako Eo. I know that they're not part of this artist collection, but it's very rare that you will find this many cards by this illustrator in one spot in fantastic condition. So I had to pick up all of these and I have absolutely zero regrets because you will not find them in one spot like that and you will not find them cheaper. The second call I made was just buying a few cheap cards for the binder. So ended up walking away with this Charmander by Kagemaru Himeno. Really like this one, and that's got to be one of their very first, very early cards. This Quilava, also by Kagemaru Himeno, is very damaged, but it is from a starter deck that is very expensive. So at 380 yen, I figured why not just pick it up. It's a great looking card. It is a hard card to find in good condition. I'll take that. And then that Sleeping Growlithe by Tomokazu Komiya that I'd overlooked at a few stores at this point. Ended up finding it here for 380 yen, and they had 2 of them. So being cheap vending series cards, being a legendary artist, that was a no-brainer. I just love this one, Sleeping Under the Table. It's very cute. And then 2 pickups that I was very happy with, both by Masakazu Fukuda, both trainer cards, both from the Heart Gold, Soul Silver era. Just fantastic illustrations. So detailed for trainer or for supporter cards. I was super stoked with these. By now, it was late. I had dinner plans in Shinjuku, which was like 30 minutes away. Stores were closing up. I wanted to wrap this thing up too, but I still wanted to visit Otachu, a place full of vintage and e-reader cards that you might have seen a video about back in 2023. I feel like every time I talk about E-series cards, I always end up talking about Otachu. It's at the bottom of Akihabara and up at level 8, and it's a vintage haven. I don't know where they get all these cards because there's a lot of people visiting this store, but every time you go in, it feels like it's been untouched. You know that when you come here, they're probably gonna have what you're looking for in good condition. Yeah, it's gonna cost you a little bit more, but it doesn't really matter, especially when you're desperate. And I was getting kind of desperate. I just wanted to grab one last card and not really overthink it. You know, I wanted to go catch up with my friends. I wanted to finish the binder. I was looking for an Atsuko Nishida card. While I was browsing, I did see that Tomokazu Komiya Dali Bird, and this being the last store of the trip, I had to buy it. But for the absolute last card, I was torn. I knew that it wanted to be Atsuko Nishida, but I couldn't decide between the Dark Espeon that I'd seen so many times across the trip and this Light Arcanine. And ultimately, I chose to leave the evolution behind. Espeon just seemed like too easy of a choice, and I was really vibing this unique composition of the Arcanine. I love the background of it. Those flowers and that holo combined with the pose, it's a really nice card. It's probably one of Atsuko Nishida's best. The price was very, very solid as well. 6,000 yen. I couldn't notice any major scratches or blemishes on it. I deliberated over a few cards on this trip. I didn't overthink too much, but I knew in here that I just wanted to go with my gut. And in the end, this Light Arcanine kind of symbolizes the whole trip. Every time I think about Light Arcanine now, I think about this binder that I built, and that's kind of cool. So over the 7 days, how'd I end up doing? Well, the Masakazu Fukuda binder ended up being the weakest with just 19 cards found overall, but this collection cost me the least, just over 17,000 yen spent, and I picked up some absolute banger cards by them, so this was by far the most efficient collection of the 4, with plenty of room to build upon. On the other side, the Atsuko Nishida binder set me back the most, a total of 47,650 yen spent, and 43 cards collected. I definitely splurged on this collection the most of the 4, with way more heavy hitter cards, but I never spent more than 10,000 yen either, so I feel like this is a solid foundation for a legendary artist. Really similar to the Kagemaru Himeno binder, with 42 cards collected and nearly 40,000 yen spent. I'm really happy about this one, because it's got such a strong mix of their early works through the Diamond Pearl era, and a stack of holos mixed in amongst them too, which in my mind are all flawless. So I'm really excited to build towards grails for both Himeno-san and Nishida-san. And finally, the Tomokazu Komiya binder, the most cards collected at 45 total, and just 31,330 yen spent, which I feel like is super low, especially with their recent surge in popularity amongst collectors. I am beyond stoked to have gotten so many of their early cards in such good condition for such great prices, because I know that if I tried to do this now, I don't think it'd be possible, so you're gonna have to bury me with this binder. Getting to build these collections was an amazing experience, so it feels kind of rude to say I wish I'd bought more cards, but fortunately, I'll be back in Japan very soon. In fact, I think I'm here right now, building probably the most important binder yet, the binder for you. So if you like this vid and you want to be part of the next journey, and maybe even take this binder and the cards inside home, make sure to hit like, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you through the next tour of Japan. Until then, thank you so much for watching and supporting this series. Take care of yourselves, guys.